Very good. So, hi, hello. Um, I'm very happy to have Daniel Simon join I think it's our second Campfire this year, of intersection group. This is really a kind of informal setting, um, more like a discussion with the community, um, different, yeah, let's say numbers of people joining depending on our scheduling. So today we have just a small group here, but we will have a good discussion nonetheless. So thank you so much, Daniel, for joining, for doing this. So we have been in touch since, I don't know, like maybe a few years, right? So at least on the radar.
hmm
And then I have seen um, the survey that you have been starting with the University of Stuttgart,
hmm
that features some insights about EDGY. So we got very curious and shared it also a bit with our network. And now we are extremely um, yeah, curious to see what came out of this. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Okay. Yeah, well, thanks, Milan, for this little introduction. Then I would say, yeah, let's get started straight away. Just a second. I'm going to share something with you.
Yeah, and also just so most people know me, but if you can also say just a few words about you and
Sure.
about Across in the Head.
I'm going to do so. Yeah.
Excellent.
Okay, yeah, well, great to be here today, to have the chance to share some hopefully useful insights from the survey that we ran last year, as Milan already mentioned. But before we're going to do so, um, well, some quick facts about me. Well, I've always been passionate about empowering enterprises sort of to look at the bigger picture, think ahead, be intentional about their future state. And that's what I've been doing for many years in the role of a consultant, coach, and trainer, and what we pursue at the company I run across in the head. And that's basically what you also see represented in the little edgy diagram, which I thought would be nice to bring along today. As you might have guessed, I certainly appreciate the power of modeling to help us communicate, to reason about something, to co-create, and so on. But don't worry, I'm not obsessed about it. I do not communicate with diagrams only. I'm not a modeling nerd or something. Well, I've just found modeling to be very helpful in enterprise design work, right? So, why did we do the survey I'm talking about today? I'm going to share insights from a survey about modeling languages, about modeling language use. We ran in 2025 with about 100 participants. So, why the survey? Well, AGI did play a role, as I'm going to elaborate a bit on now. I've been teaching ArchiMate for years, and it's not uncommon to have people on an ArchiMate course who know a bit about other languages like BPMN and UML, for example. So then one of the first things to do is to explain how ArchiMate differs from those languages and also what benefits you can get by making use of ArchiMate that you would possibly not get from those other languages. And from my experience, that can be pretty well explained. Yeah? BPMN and UML focus on specific, very specific aspects or say domains, yeah? While ArchiMate is meant to help us model across domains. But now there's EDGY. And although EDGY itself and the idea behind is very well described on the intersection group's web pages by well, some of what you guys created, yeah, but I was wondering about how to explain how this might all work together now with EDGY. How would it look like to use EDGY in addition to ArchiMate, for example? Or could EDGY replace ArchiMate? I know that's not the original idea, but I did not, well, sort of come across anything that provided the answer I was looking for. So that led to the idea to look at what's already out there in terms of what is being practiced, right? And when thinking this through a little more, having teamed up with Stuttgart University, um, our partner with whom we ran the survey, we figured out that although there are various sources out there that tell us something about what certain languages are meant to help us do, there was actually little evidence about how modeling languages are really used in practice. So that's why we set up the survey to gain a better understanding of modeling language use in practice. We focused on BPMN, UML, ArchiMate, and EDGY for various reasons. Among other things, we wanted to have different categories of languages being represented in the survey. And those languages we picked were assumed to belong to the most, let's say, prominent ones in those categories. Not surprisingly, looking at one of the basic questions in the survey, as you can see, which modeling languages are used in your organization, BPMN turned out to be most commonly used, followed by ArchiMate and UML. EDGY is way younger, so not yet that much used in practice. Still, it seems to have already gained, well, I would say remarkable traction in practice, since in terms of the individual respondents' modeling experience, so there were questions related to that in the survey as well. It turned out that more than 20% of the respondents have either created or consumed visual representations in EDGY, which I think is not that bad for a language less than 3 years old. Is that correct,
Yeah,
roughly?
it's just a bit more than 3 years now, I think.
Okay.
We're just
Anyway,
at the threshold. Yeah.
anyway, respondents who stated that any of those languages are used in their organization were then asked to tell us a bit more about that use, right? So actually, we were interested in a few fundamental questions about modeling language use in organizations. First, we were interested in how widely a given language is used across the organization. Is it just rarely or occasionally used by just a few people in the organization? Or is it used on a wider, more regular basis? Second, we wanted to understand why the language is being used, what the main purposes of use are. Third, we were keen to explore who are the ones in terms of, well, roles in the organization using the language, either by creating maps, diagrams, or whatever artifacts themselves, or by consuming any of those. Fourth, we wanted to see how effective the use of a given language is to serve the intended purposes. And fifth, we asked participants what they found to be main challenges in making effective use of a given language. So I'm going to highlight some of the findings now, and we'll have breaks along the way, well, to give us the chance to reflect on what we will have heard about, compare with own experiences, and have some discussion before moving on. That's kind of the idea for today. Yeah? So first question I'd like to focus on is the question of who. More specifically, this illustration is about who consumes representations in a given language. It's the top 3 consumers per language based on how often they were mentioned by respondents of the survey. So what does it tell us? We have somewhat different audiences, with process managers and, well, business analysts being among the primary audience of BPMN representations, for example, which is different from other languages. We also have some overlaps, though. Solution architect, for example, being one of the top consumers of both ArchiMate and UML representations. Generally speaking, it seems that architects are most likely to require multilingual skills. And in terms of EDGY, I think it's interesting to see that it's the only language with business executives among the top consumers. So languages have somewhat different top users. That's one thing. But what about others? Other roles behind those top users, if you want to put it that way. And this is where there seems to be a difference in terms of AGI being used compared to how others are. So, for example, the role ranked fifth as a consumer of AGI representations was mentioned by 55% of respondents, while the one ranked fifth in case of ArchiMate was only mentioned by 38% of respondents. Number 15 in the EDGY ranking received 33%, while number 15 in the ArchiMate ranking only got 14%. So this is what this little picture here at the left-hand side is supposed to illustrate. Apparently, it's more common for EDGY representations to have a broader audience, so beyond just the top users. Yeah? A broader audience in organizations than those created in other languages. So that's the first thing I wanted to focus on. And well, maybe just a very quick discussion if you want. Yeah? If there's something to discuss from your point of view based on the initial findings we just heard about. So any thoughts, own experience you'd like to share, whatever it is, feel free to come forward.
I just want to first say it's very unusual for me to see edgy in black and white. Um,
Yeah,
but I see
sorry
what
for
you did
that.
there. Um, for me, it's really reflecting. Well, it's in a way good news because it means that two of our assumptions are actually working. One is that um, it is a shared language that we are making. And I know that, in a way, I guess ArchiMate is because it's to be used across domains. So is a domain somehow is that correlated or the same as a role? And UML, the U in UML, kind of hints at that it's also in a way shared, right? Or like at least it should be so much of a standard that it should be used um, by many people that have the challenge that it's designed to tackle.
Mhm.
So I would say at least those three languages, I guess we share this ambition that we want to make it usable and or readable and maybe even creatable for multiple roles or domains.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that how much that correlates. So that's good news. And the other good news that I see is that executives are mentioned because that was another big question that we have had or
Mhm.
still have. Is are we still too geeky? It's still a flow diagram or like a flow chart if you um, like break it down to the diagram type that most edgy representations are currently made in. We also have a few alternatives like a sticky note representation, and we are working on
Mhm.
more alternatives. Actually, to make it more compatible with executive kind of like rich pictures, sketches, PowerPoint kind of metaphorical representations and so on. But it's good to know that yeah, there is already an executive audience for
Seems
this.
to work, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Um, that's kind of my thinking.
Mhm.
What about the others? Daniel, I know you have been also working a lot with um, strategy and edgy. Any, and I don't want to force you to appear again, but if you want, then feel free to jump in, or anyone else. Otherwise, you can also write something in the chat and we will
Sure.
take
We'll
it.
get back to it later then. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, okay. Then let's maybe move on. There is some more hopefully interesting stuff to look at. And well, I'd like to continue by looking at how effective modeling language use is perceived to be in practice. So what's being illustrated here are the average scores based on what respondents picked on a scale from 1 to 4, from not effective to extremely effective. Now, as you can see, all languages ended up between 2 and 3, between somewhat effective and largely effective. With EDGY being the only one, well, you could say quite close to largely effective. And despite other facts we are going to shed a little more light on in just a few minutes, the use of EDGY is perceived to be most effective in serving the intended purposes, based on a relatively small number of responses available on EDGY use, I'll have to add. But anyway, I think that's remarkable, right? On a scale from 1 to 4, I think 2.78 as opposed to 2.31 is not just a negligible difference. In general, for the other languages, aside from EDGY, with effectiveness at such a moderate level, it seems to be a bit disappointing. So what could be reasons for this? First of all, it seems to be due to the challenges that organizations face in making effective use of modeling languages in practice, which was another question in the survey. For BPMN, UML, and ArchiMate, it's first and foremost the complexity of the language, with, well, people being overwhelmed by the many concepts being offered and the complexity of the diagrams being created, which practitioners seem to find challenging. Another issue raised I'd like to highlight is a lack of training and education people received in those languages. With EDGY, it's again a bit different. Here, the main challenges are a lack of tool support available in organizations and a limited understanding of the benefits, which kind of reinforces what I've touched on right at the beginning of the session. So if too many people do not see the need for an additional language like EDGY and struggle to understand how things could, let's say, reasonably come together in practice, how would you make effective use of it? So let's keep this in mind for a few minutes. In addition to challenges, it's also worth taking a look at the main purposes for which languages are used in practice, wondering about how this might be related to effectiveness. Generally speaking, a major rationale for use across all languages in this survey is facilitation of communication between people. And I think that's not that much of a surprise. Other top purposes vary though. Additional purposes for which BPMN is primarily used includes the specification of executable workflows, for example. While with EDGY, it's much about collaboration being facilitated across different disciplines in the organization. So what does that have to do with effectiveness? With purposes being sought, you create expectations, I guess. Yeah? Expectations among users of the language. And if those expectations are not fully met, well, there might be disappointment. And a given language is maybe found not to be that much effective. So my point is that the sought purposes of use will or may well have an influence on how effective a language is perceived to be. In fact, as our survey data indicates, organizations might expect too much from the use of a given modeling language, or they might just have wrong expectations, if you want to put it that way. To facilitate collaboration between people from different disciplines in the organization is maybe not what ArchiMate is best known for example. And for providing guidance on how to carry out work, you might rather want to use BPMN, and again, not necessarily ArchiMate. So in addition to the challenges, it seems expectations are another relevant factor in relation to perceived effectiveness of modeling language use. Now let's turn to the usage extent. What we found out is that the majority of organizations seem to actually use their languages of choice only to a rather limited extent. With UML and EDGY, most organizations in the dataset seem to use the language only to a low extent, which means occasionally or in specific projects only. With BPMN and ArchiMate, it's a moderate usage extent, with the language being used on a somewhat wider and more regular basis. So what then attracted our interest is whether this is in any way related to effectiveness. And well, applying correlation analysis, we found out that indeed it is. There is a positive relationship between usage extent and effectiveness. And this goes for all languages in the survey. So in case of ArchiMate, for example, high usage extent usually comes with at least largely effective language use, while non-effective language use was only mentioned along with a very low or low usage extent. So it clearly seems effectiveness does not come effortlessly. Some of you might have come across this idiom here: you can't eat your cake and have it too. So once the cake is eaten, it's gone, right? And it's often used to stress the necessity of making choices, similar to, what's the other? You can't have it both ways. And it seems that's sort of an issue in practice, as our survey results indicate. Organizations expecting quite a bit from modeling language use, but maybe not willing to put much effort in it in terms of people being upskilled, tools being implemented, change activities being redesigned to include modeling, and so on. And I think that's a particular issue with modeling languages of higher complexity as perceived by practitioners, but it's certainly also relevant for effective use of EDGY. Ultimately, our findings indicate there are various determinants of effectiveness. Of course, it's the language itself, what it offers, how things are presented in the specification of the language, and so on. But it's also the rationale behind the use of the language and the expectations that come with it. It's the skills people have in making proper use of the language. It's the tools in place to support the use of the language, and it's the adoption of the language across the organization. Well, and aside from the language itself, all those aspects are ultimately in the organization's hands, right? How to use a given modeling language, how to enable proper modeling language use, that's ultimately the organization's choice. So actually, when effectiveness turns out to be limited, I think it might not be the worst idea to reconsider questions like, are we chasing the right goals? Or would we need to adjust or lower our expectations? Have we made sufficient investments? Or would we need to invest more in people, tools, whatever? And are we clear about what to use from the language? Do we need to refocus on what is relevant to us, which is not necessarily the entire language, right? And have we brought the language into a sufficiently regular and wide use? It might not suffice to use it now and then, but on a more regular basis in each change program of a certain size or whatever. So let's stop here for a moment again. Maybe over to you once again. Any thoughts, observations? Again, own experience you'd like to share, go ahead if you like. And then afterwards, there's another final part to cover.
Right. So we have one comment from Rich, who unfortunately also had to drop, saying that he thinks that the huge advantage of EDGY is that BPMN and ArchiMate are so complicated, and too much time is spent explaining the notation. But the real purpose of the diagram is to clarify or capture a concept or activity. It's more of an observation, I think, than a. I have to say, I was surprised by the first picture that you showed
Which
about
one?
the effectiveness.
Effectiveness, average one, yeah.
Yes, um, because it basically says they're not effective, but they're not effective, right? So they're like, hmm,
Yeah,
and it's like all of them.
all of them. Yeah.
Um, so I started to wonder when I saw that a few weeks back,
Mm-hmm.
because I think it was the first one or one of the first ones that you shared on LinkedIn as a
Mm-hmm.
preview.
Yeah.
Um, is that true for like English, for example? Like is it maybe something that has to do with languages uh, or graphical languages or to a certain extent codified or technical languages? Um, sometimes, we have this conversation with people who try to pitch and position EDGY in their organizations, and they're like, okay, give me the ROI, the return on invest of EDGY, and I'm like one of my favorite answers is, what's the ROI of English?
Mm-hmm.
You know, we all like someone invested in all of us, especially here today, learning it. um, is there a ROI, and is it very effective? And like yeah, this is just like some thoughts. I think there is one, but it's hard. It's hard to say. Yeah, you will get X amount back from your investment in teaching everyone to speak ArchiMate or to speak BPMN or to speak EDGY.
Yeah. See the point. Um, I think the comparison is it's not a bad one. I mean, I was trying to point out with what I just showed you. I mean, you can do something about at least that's what sort of the survey results indicate to some extent. You can do something about effectiveness, making language use more effective. Yeah, and well, think about what you did to learn English. Yeah, I guess not just attend a 2-day course. Yeah, but you studied, I guess, for a few years or something as a non-native speaker, right? So why would we think we would be sort of versed in using a language like ArchiMate or whatever by just attending a 1 or 2 day course? Yeah. So I think the comparison is a good one to make us think a bit about some of the points I was trying to highlight with what I just showed you.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm wondering if you did a survey and you would put in that like a bit broader scope, huh? What is the effectiveness of English? What's the effectiveness of I don't know, the effectiveness of Java? Like
Yeah, would be interesting. Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Or sign language maybe, huh? And like I know that these all serve vastly different purposes, but it kind of reminds me a few years back I did a project with SAP. Um, the topic was to integrate a startup that they bought into the company and into the product portfolio and the organization.
Mhm.
And so the people at the startup basically were very UML um, focused and um, otherwise spoke mostly C sharp and French.
Mhm.
And then it was SAP France, but still a large part of SAP is English and German speaking.
Yeah.
Um, and then we were working with architects, and all the architects at SAP are using TUM. It's an in-house language called the Technical Architecture Modeling. And it's just, no one outside of this giant, admittedly giant world of SAP knows about this language really. But everyone in there is kind of used to it.
Yeah.
And so so is it the best language? Is it better than ArchiMate? Is it better than EDGY? Probably, I can tell you it's black and white, so it's definitely not more colorful. But you like people learned the notation, which is also kind of arbitrary. They have lots of little lines with a dot, and it means something, and you have to learn it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you can't understand these
Yeah.
these
Exactly.
diagrams. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Now, yeah.
So, but I guess, yeah, as you said, we might need another survey. At least that would be interesting to do, right? Looking at natural languages, program languages, yeah, wondering about their effectiveness. So why not? Anyway, today we're going to keep focusing on modeling languages.
Yes, fair enough. I'm not trying to digress on purpose,
No,
but
all fine.
as someone who studied originally communication design,
Hmm.
I find it quite interesting because one of the like communication design is mostly a fancier, more intellectualized word for graphic design, right? So basically designing things like logos and posters
Hmm.
and then at some point websites. And you spend a lot of time on learning typography, learning grid systems and stuff like that, and also
Hmm.
iconography. And I always find it interesting that this is a skill that is uh, almost non-existent in architecture curriculum. But on the other hand, the languages are an applied case of this, right? So it's graphic design, it's typography, it's visual design, it's lines and it's basically ink on paper that means something.
Hmm.
And uh, like Um, so I spent a lot of time learning how to communicate things so that everyone, or at least most people, can understand. And what you do is you try to use things that are familiar to them. Now, I feel like the languages try the other way around. They try to establish a standard, and then when you learn it, then you are familiar with them, right? And I guess one of the things that in EDGY we are trying to do is um, even if you don't really know all of the language, we try to um, uh, favor you still or try to help you still or support the idea that people can still understand some stuff. Like
Yeah.
when we look at our Canadians, how they use it, which we now call the Montreal style, one of the reasons for our next conference is there.
Hmm.
Um, they would use EDGY with their clients, but not tell them about it. Right? And
Okay.
say
Hmm.
like, what does the customer want? And then they may map it out, and everything is red. Okay, and then they're asking, okay, what do we want? And they map it out, and everything's green. And then they ask, okay, what can we do? And they map it out, and it's all blue. And then at some point, the client is like, this is blue again. Why? And then they're like, yeah, yeah. So there's a language behind. If you know, we can tell you about it. But as long as you recognize that if it's blue, it means something already. So I'm wondering if
Yeah.
there's you know, something there to develop to make this effectiveness thing go a little bit more to the right. Anyway, sorry, I'm talking a lot. Anyone
No,
has
that's fine.
a question, comment on the findings? Vesa, Daniel? I muted all of you because there was a bit of noise. So if you want to say, you need to unmute yourself.
Otherwise, we move into the final part, and then there's you still have the chance to um, yeah to share thoughts, experiences, whatever at the very end, right?
Yep, or
Yeah,
offline
shall we do
afterwards.
so?
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So this is an overview, single page overview of the survey results about EDGY. So despite being applied least in organizations to date, the use of EDGY is perceived to be most effective in serving the intended purposes. Yeah, we already covered that. Yeah? Main purposes and challenges are somewhat different from other languages, as highlighted earlier as well. And there is something remarkable about the audience compared to other languages. Well, and this is essentially what's made us sketch things the way you're going to see now, based on the survey results, wondering about how to differentiate between and how to classify languages. I would say languages are usually differentiated by how much is being covered by them, content-wise, yeah, if you want to put it that way. And while BPMN in particular, but also UML to some extent, are focused on specific areas or domains like processes in case of BPMN, ArchiMate and EDGY are meant to help us model across domains. But there is a second dimension to consider, as our survey results suggest, and that's the audience. More specifically, the breadth of the audience, the variety of language users, which seems to be highest with EDGY. And if we now keep focusing on ArchiMate and EDGY a little more, there is more to observe. EDGY and ArchiMate are somewhat similar in terms of their scope, you could say. Yeah? But how they deal with anything within that scope is again different. Yeah? There is a higher level of specificity and formalization in ArchiMate than in EDGY. And with respect to the audience dimension, it's not just about the breadth or variety of the audience, which is different. There is also a difference in terms of the level of engagement or participation. With EDGY, modeling is maybe more likely to be done collaboratively. Based on what you just saw being conceptualized, you might well argue that EDGY kind of establishes a new subcategory of modeling languages. So in a master thesis written at Stuttgart University as part of our little research project, it was basically put that way. Within the category of cross-domain modeling languages, there are expert-oriented modeling languages like ArchiMate. And now with EDGY, there are also languages for sort of more participative modeling, right? If you want to refer to it that way. So with that in mind, I think there are two major takeaways for the further evolution of EDGY. First, keep it simple and resist the temptation of adding more elements to the language. In other words, maintain EDGY's position on the playing field of modeling languages. Ensure it remains fit for participative modeling, right? Interestingly, ArchiMate is currently moving somewhat leftward with the upcoming release, yeah, with a few concepts being discarded, which is actually another reason for not letting EDGY grow too much to remain distinguishable from my point of view. Yeah? Up to discussion in just a few minutes. Second, I think it's important to further clarify how EDGY may be used as another language in practice. Not a language meant to replace others, but to complement them. And I think that's where a combined use with ArchiMate would be of particular relevance. Since this is something that organizations using ArchiMate, but not yet EDGY, might wonder about. So how could things look like? Just some food for thought here. Let's think in terms of layers, as we typically do when dealing with software. If you preferred simplicity over specificity in cross-domain modeling, you may rely on EDGY and have things enriched by labels or tags. I think that's how you call it, right?
Oh, we call them
Based on,
labels.
okay, labels based on ArchiMate to differentiate the elements maybe a bit more.
Hmm.
If you wanted to have things visualized in a simple way and at the same time, let's say, enable, yeah, more precise reasoning about whatever question at hand, you may want to use EDGY as the presentation layer put over a model created using the Archimate language concepts. And again, if you wanted to combine simplicity with specificity as required by stakeholders and questions at hand, you may want to use ArchiMate to present things to architects, but maybe really only then, while elsewhere you would possibly rely on EDGY representations based on whatever underlying model. So I think something like this could be kind of the way to go to help increase clarity around a potential combined use of EDGY with other cross-domain languages like ArchiMate. And that's, yeah, takes me to my final takeaway message today. It's rarely just one modeling language you find being used in organizations, right? But more likely several ones. Several ones that you may want to have used in a combined way, as our survey results suggest. And then it's not just about making sure a single language is used in an effective way, but a combined use of languages is going to work effectively. And this means effective language use ultimately becomes a matter of proper enterprise design, I would say. Making deliberate choices about which language will be used to serve which purposes and to support communication between which stakeholders and so on, to make things work most effectively across the entire enterprise. And this is what this, well, final illustration is supposed to address, meant to be an example only, in which EDGY is used to help connect different language communities, if you want to refer to them that way, different language communities in an organization. So this is how it could maybe look like. But as I said before, up for the discussion. So time for a final exchange. What are your thoughts? Anything in particular you'd like to reflect on?
Right, I have a lot of thoughts, but before we run out of time because of that, anyone wants to jump in? No, mostly flies on the wall today.
So then it's your turn. Yeah.
Okay. Um, yeah, I mean, um, I find it extremely interesting um, the way yeah you analyze this. Like I think like we sometimes get this this feedback like another language. Really? We have so many already. And why um like there are some people who are actually just against languages.
Hmm.
Also
Yeah,
in the
sure.
architecture community, they're like, this is actually distracting us from the actual content, the actual messages. Uh, why don't we just focus on the message we want to communicate and not so much about um, trying to find a common medium or like language to exchange in, um, because this takes the effort, this takes the attention away from the actual message that we need to talk about, right? So there are some people that say that.
Hmm.
And what is interesting there is that some of the communities that you might have included in the last slide might not actually have a formal language
Hmm.
that
Yep.
they're using, right? So they might much more rely on informal languages, on actually like English or whatever
Yep.
text language they're using, or speech, than maybe some visual representations that are more free form and less codified. Um, and uh, I'm always wondering, um, how can we include them? How can we maybe make a bridge between what they care about and the more formal languages? And maybe that's what you mean with the participatory class of languages. I'm just interpreting here.
Yeah. No, that's right.
So that we lower the barrier,
Yes.
um, but at the same time, it kind of means that we give up on certain um, traits and advantages of some more formal languages.
Hmm.
And I guess what I find also interesting is that there's often this discussion of the business and the architects, which kind of I think is a unfortunate extension of business and IT.
Hmm.
Um, and it's often presented as some kind of duality, right? Or we have our language, it's there for clarity, it's there for documentation, it's maybe there also for legal reasons, for traceability, for compliance, for all sorts of things. And then there are them, and they don't have that, and they are not interested in that, and we are so misunderstood. And you know, but then I'm always like, well, like other communities also have formal languages. Like if you look at an architectural blueprint, and I mean one made by a building architect that shows the infrastructure, of a or the structure of a building that is highly codified so that the engineers understand the architects when they actually plan the building, the construction and the construction site and the phase and phases of the construction work and so on. So why is it treated as such an exception that there is this uh, conflict or this tension between the formal and the informal? We have that everywhere, all over the world.
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, I think to some extent it's also due to um, well, it's an educational issue
Hmm.
to some extent. Yeah. So what kind of students, yeah, in information systems and business administration or whatever, yeah, what they learn at university, for example, yeah, are they made familiar, yeah, with more of sort of more formal approaches, yeah, to getting something mapped, modeled, yeah. Maybe for students in well, information systems subjects or whatever, yes, to some extent, yeah, but business administration, maybe less, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's at least part of the explanation. So there's something to be done there as well. And I'm doing my best to contribute, by the way, giving
Yeah.
lectures at university and so on.
And to us.
Well,
Yeah. Excellent. No, and I think sometimes what we are currently trying to do with the alternative styles, it's a tentative title, but like different alternative depictions of
hmm
edgy that
hmm
might emphasize a bit less the structural aspect and or the formal aspect and more the favor the communication of the messages behind. Um, it's a little bit the other way around of what um, like if you know the business motivation model, for
yeah,
example,
sure.
that's a bit the other side of the same coin. No? It's an attempt to formalize
Yeah.
strategy formulation into something that kind of resembles, for me, in my simple interpretation, something like UML. You know, like basically boxes and lines between them,
hmm
um, which of course then loses the audience that doesn't think that way. So that's one of the challenges, and I think
It
that's
is.
really it's really interesting what you came up with when it comes to combining languages like EDGY and ArchiMate, because we know like they will be combined, and or just also because there are diverse communities inside and around enterprises, and so they have their own languages, and ours are just um, tiny part of that.
Yeah.
But we get a lot of questions about using EDGY and ArchiMate together. Um, Not so much from the other communities, like we don't get service designers or organization designers interested in ArchiMate, but we get architects seeing an opportunity to
hmm
reaching out to those other communities, so
hmm
business, organization, service design, product design, change management, and so on. Um, and the question is always, um, should it uh, like where do I draw the line between the
Yeah.
languages?
Yeah.
And then also how do I draw something that bridges the line?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I would have supposed that this is a particular question sort of raised in the architecture community. Yeah. So that's why that was kind of one of my final messages I want to get across. I think that's where you might want to take a closer look at, yeah,
yeah,
in your community to help people better understand how this such a combined use, yeah, how it could work, how it could look like.
yeah. I mean, I'm a little bit of a, already in my kind of previous beginning of the career journey in user experience, I was a big fan of a methodology by IBM called OVID, Object
hmm
View and Interaction Design, and
hmm
it uses UML to specify interaction design, so user interfaces and their behavior and their data and so on. And I was a mega fan. And then I noticed that I lose everyone if I show these diagrams to clients and to users and so on. And in a way, this is happening now again to some of our audiences or user community with EDGY. And yeah, it would be interesting to explore. And you know that there is a mapping of ArchiMate through 3.2, not yet 4,
Yeah, I
of
know.
EDGY. Yeah. And yeah, one of the discussions that we had in that group with the ArchiMate expert with Marc and Jean-Baptiste was so if we're using them together, how are we using them together? Is it like you suggested? Should we like because I don't want to go too much into that because we are at the top of the hour, but um, so there are some things where ArchiMate goes much deeper, and there's some other parts of EDGY where ArchiMate basically has nothing. How do you deal with that discrepancy?
Yeah. And I think that's kind of the important part, right? In general, yeah, how things could come together here in a reasonable way. Maybe not that much about particular mappings, how one concept in one language maps onto the other one. This, of course, also relevant, yeah. But in a more general way, that's what I was trying to illustrate, yeah, with this year in particular, yeah. I think that's what people, well, that's where you might want to give people a bit more inspiration, right? If you want to put it that way, yeah. To
Yeah.
make them use Edgy then, possibly in addition to Archimate.
All right. Yeah, I think we are slightly over time. So I would say thank you so much for your time today and for the presentation. Really,
It was a
really
pleasure.
interesting. And yeah, we'll make the video available on Slack. And I
Hmm.
hope we can continue the conversation.
Yes, I very
Yes.
much hope so too. Thanks for having me today.
All right. Thank you, Daniel. I will stop the recording.